Shut up and sit down.
Thank you, I love you. And in this street, he lives.
Is a young man setting out in life, uncertain of his final destination, and exploring life to the full.
And he's a man who's sick than many of your other protagonists, is my impression.
Oh, okay, well I'll accept your verdict on it. I haven't compared him to any of the others. When I write a book, I don't think about books that I have written 20 or 30 years previously. Each book stands on its own. And the characters are as I visualize them and as they present themselves to me.
Right. In this book is particularly a lot of writing about hunting.
Yes.
And safari. Can you tell me about your own experience in this sense?
Oh, well, I've always been a hunter from the time when I was 9 years of age, and I was given my first .22 long rifle, and one of my jobs on the ranch was to shoot rabbits for dog food to feed my father's dogs. So that was one of my jobs. So from that point of view, I was a professional hunter when I was 9 years of age. And since then, I've always seen hunting as a very close tool of conservation. And I know in Scandinavia that the hunters there are very much involved in the preservation of the species, and there's no feeling whatsoever amongst the hunters that they want to wipe out the last elk in Scandinavia. They want to have those animals with them for the rest of time, for their children and their grandchildren. So the two go hand in hand, hunting and conservation. And for me, I have a fascination with the animals of Africa, as I have for the tribal people of Africa, and it gives me pleasure to write about them, and it gives me pleasure to write about hunting. And the central character, one of the central themes in the book, is the great safari of Teddy Roosevelt at the beginning of the 20th century, and all those things just made for good plotting and good things that I could, good subjects into which I could sink my teeth and really imagine myself in those roles.
And can you tell me about your interest in elephant hunting? I know you spoke
about
elephant
persuasion. Hunting has been very much a theme through African history. I mean, ivory was valued highly by the ancients, by the pharaohs, and every other civilization since then. Ivory has played a very important part. So that's why I have ivory chess pieces in front of me. I have the elephant is, to me, is the monarch of Africa, and essential to my thinking about Africa, my thinking about the wilderness. And thank goodness, because of hunting and because of preservation, there are more elephants in Africa at the moment than there were 150 years ago.
You spend your time, once in a year you go hunting in Botswana, is it?
I go to Botswana, and I go to Kenya and to Tanzania, and I also hunt in South Africa. However, more and more now, I've hunted all the lions and leopards and elephant that I want to, and so I enjoy being involved in conservation societies. I'm a trustee of the World Wildlife Fund and Back to Africa project and the Panthera project, all of these very much involved in preservation of habitat and of the species. So that gives me a very good excuse to go on safari, which I don't hunt on, but I get close to the animals. And it's just a part of my life, a part of being African.
Which animal do you consider it most interesting to hunt?
Well, the buffalo is all those dangerous animals are dangerous, but the buffalo is the one. If I haven't planned a safari, but if I want to go on a dangerous game safari, then I would hunt buffalo, because there are many buffalo. There's no question that they are endangered or anything like that. The place swarms with buffalo, and they are very big, strong, dangerous creatures, and they are cunning and they are aggressive. But on the other hand, they are very interesting to be close to and to move with a herd, you know, and see the whole pattern of the big males and the breeding females and the youngsters. And there are still herds of 100, 200 of them in Africa. So it's a very interesting animal, and an ugly brute too. So I don't feel too much compassion when I shoot one.
How about elephant? You described the feeling of first shooting an elephant, which is somewhat a poetic moment, as I understand, and this I also read in your other books. How was your first time confronting the elephant?
But my hunting an elephant is what I've written about in the books. So in fact, I've described intimately the feelings that one has when you're hunting an elephant, a big elephant. I've spent many hundreds of pages on describing it, so I find it difficult to give you in 10 words what it's like. It's a very moving experience, and it's essential to the understanding of African wildlife to have been in contact with the big elephant.
I read somewhere that when you were about 12 years old, there were some lions attacking your farm.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about this experience?
Well, my father had gone off on holiday with my mother. He left me in control of the ranch. And when he'd been gone about a week, in the middle of the night, the herd boys, the Africans who herded the cattle, came running up to the house and knocked on the window and said that the lions had got in amongst the cattle. So I grabbed my father's rifle, or one of my father's rifles, and went down to the pasture, and sure enough there were 3 lions had killed 8 of his cattle, and the carcasses were lying where they'd been pulled down, and the lions were still feeding on them. So I moved up on them, and the male lion jumped up, and I dropped him, and then the 2 females charged in to protect their mate, as it were. And so I shot them. So with 3 shots, I had the 3 lions.
How did you feel after such a experience?
I felt very shaken. At the time, I felt very little. I was concentrated on what I had to do, but afterwards, my legs felt as though they were going to give away under me, and I had to sit down because an angry lion, or a lion that is threatening you, is a very formidable beast, and his big yellow eyes and the tail slashing from side to side, and of course the sound of him, the angry grunting of a lion sounds like a steam engine. And so yes, it was something that I won't forget for the rest of my life.
What did your father say when he got back?
Well, there was a bit of confusion when he got back because when he reached the top gate of the ranch, which was about 15 miles from the house where I was, the black guys were shouting to him the little boss and the lions, and they had killed them, and he thought the lions had killed me. So he shot down, in terrible panic, my mother crying, and they drove up fast, and I stepped out of the house with a big smile, and he was so relieved he gave me a hiding. Because, you idiot, what are you doing messing around with lions? And then so I was very taken aback. So then he went out and he saw the skins, and he saw the big male lion skin there, and then it cooled down, and he said, well done, my boy, and he gave me the rifle with which I shot him. He said, it's now your rifle because you can obviously use it.
Were you a hero among your friends?
Not amongst my friends, but certainly all the black people on the farm. They were very impressed,
right.
Extremely impressed.
Did they do the ritual with you?
Yes, well, they did the dance, when the lions were, but of course my father wasn't there. If he'd been there, he would have put blood down my face, and it was the traditional way of saluting a hunter that's killed a lion.
Right, this you also described in the book with Kermit Roosevelt.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that based on your own experience?
Oh yes. 90% of what I write about Africa is based on my own experience. Well, certainly about the accounts of the people who were there at the time. And the Roosevelt safari has been very well documented because it was a wonder. I mean, Roosevelt gave up the chance of being the President of America for a third term because he wanted that time not to be running the United States of America, but to come on the Great Safari. So, yes, I relied a lot on the writings of the people who were there or knew about the safari. But then again, 90% of everything is from my own personal experience.
Right. So many would draw some parallels between you and maybe Hemingway, Haggard. People.
Well, I don't drink as much as Hemingway, but I take it as a great compliment that in the Financial Times, John Sutherland, who's professor of literature, of Victorian literature at the Cambridge University, he said that Wilbur Smith is the modern day Rider Haggard, and I take that as a great compliment because the first sort of adult books that I read were Allan Quatermain and King Solomon's Mines, and since then I have held Rider Haggard in great admiration as a writer.
Right, and in your books you mostly write, or almost write, about colonial Africa.
Yeah.
Have you considered writing about modern day conflicts such as Darfur, Sudan?
I certainly would not do that.
Right.
Because the reason being that my writing is more a celebration of the European experience in Africa. Modern Africa is gone back to become to being black Africa, and I think that black writers should write about it. And apart from that, I think that a novel set in present-day Africa, by the time you'd written half the book, the circumstances would have changed so completely that you'd have to restart and you could never finish a book of it. And quite frankly, I don't have the same intense feelings about it as I do about the characters that from a European point of view opened up Africa, the first European explorers.
But like in your last book, not this one, but the other one,
Triumph of the Sun.
you experienced Muslims movement already then.
Oh yes.
And the English colonial, the way they experience Muslims now in these days, is the same as it did 400 years ago.
Well, you see, that is different from the political aspects of modern Africa. The Islam has been a huge force, as we know, from the 6th century, and it's within 60 years of the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the Muslim, his brothers and sons, were in Europe already. They had conquered half of Spain. They only were stopped at the Pyrenees. So, and they swept right across Africa and down the east coast of Africa. So, as an African, I have lived very closely with the Islamic religion and the worshippers of the Prophet.
But would you say history is repeating itself, like in the 18th century?
Well, it's not. It's continuing.
Continuing.
It's not repeating itself, but because Christianity has eroded, whilst the Islamic religion has become stronger and stronger and expanded further and further. And very few Christians have the same driving religious forces as they had 200 and 300 years ago. So from that point of view, Christianity has weakened and Islam has grown a great deal stronger.
Right. Your wife, is she Muslim or?
No, she's not. She has her own religion, which adopted from me, really. I think.
Right. Adopted from you.
Yeah.
So what is your religion?
I am a believer. I'm an animist, and an animist sees God and the influence of God in everything. The tides of the ocean, the circuit of the planets, the incredible miracle of the life force, all these things I see as God. And I don't find it necessary to go and once a week and get down on my knees and admit that I'm a sinner. Because as I always say, my sins may be scarlet, but at least my books are red. Right. I don't worry too much about being a sinner, because we're all sinners.
You don't have a heavy conscience about
not at all.
Your life? No. Speaking of religion, magic is also a little bit important in this book in terms of.
Well, it's the mysticism and witchcraft, and that go back into some of my earlier books. And again, being African, I have been very close to those beliefs, the beliefs of the black people, and many of the African tribal religions are ancestor worship. Their gods are their ancestors who went before them. So when they pray or communicate with the other side, it's always through what they imagine of the ghosts of their ancestors, the spirits of their ancestors. So I've been fascinated by those sort of beliefs, and I've written them more and more into my books.
Yes. So is it something you still believe in, or have you advanced from that?
What I believe in the presence of witchcraft. Yeah. I've seen some remarkable things. So I certainly wouldn't discount the mystical powers of some human beings, and to see into the future or to have a prescience of events, and to somehow project their wishes into reality. So all of this fascinates me, and I write about it. But I'm not for a moment saying I believe in it. I think it's very fascinating. I've seen some extraordinary things.
You have a spiritual approach to life.
Yes, I do. I think that the spiritual conscience is something that makes us different from the animals, and so one of the many things that makes us different from the animals. So I think it's part of being a human being.
Did you have any spiritual feeling when you were young that you were to become something great in your life?
Oh no, I was like all young people. I was slightly confused about what the whole business of life was about, and there was only when I was in my late 20s and 30s that my life gathered direction, and I realized that what I had to do.
As I understand, you also worked as an accountant.
Yes, that's correct. I did that.
That was did you want to become that, to be that? Right?
No, I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was to have something to do with writing, because it was the one thing that from the very early age fascinated me. The use of language, particularly the English language, was, it was sort of imbued into me, so that English words in my mouth tasted like chocolate. There was a good feeling to use language, and to write it down was even a better feeling, especially when you crafted a sentence or a paragraph or a whole story. That I thought was very important to me. So I knew that I could never be a great writer, or I could never be a Hemingway or a John Steinbeck. So the next best thing was to be a journalist. Then again, just work with words and writing. But my father said to me, don't be a damn fool, you'll starve to death if you do that, go and get a real job. So I looked around desperately for a real job, and the next best thing I could find was to go into accountancy, which I did, and which was excellent. It served his advice served me perfectly. It was unintentionally the best advice he could have given me, because first of all, having studied accountancy, I understood, learned how money works. I could read a balance sheet, and I could understand all the terms of finance and accountancy. And it diverted me from journalism, which is not a good training for creative writing. Journalism, in my view, is very different from creative writing, because if you become a journalist, especially a young cub reporter, you are bullied by your editor and everyone above you, and they're not interested in your thoughts or your imaginings. They want the facts. How old was he? What speed was the car doing when it hit him? How many people witnessed the thing? And it's just facts. And although it's the use of words in writing, it's not a creative writing. So I was able then to explore and discover what creative writing was about on my own bat, and by reading other writers and reading books. So for me, that was the best apprenticeship possible.
Growing up on a farm in Rhodesia, how did you? Was reading the natural thing to do for you, for a young kid on a farm with all the adventures?
I don't know about other young kids, but I had a wonderful mother who was. My dad was a man of action, a man who likes to work with his hands, create, build things, plough land, chop down trees, and anything to do with art and music and reading was a waste of time as far as he was concerned. But on the other hand, my mother loved, she's a fine artist. Some of these paintings here down the stairs outside there are her work. And she loved reading, and in those days, the deadly television had not been invented, so parents still read bedtime stories to their children, or my mom would read a story to me any time I asked for it. And so I learned from her about how wonderful books are and what they contain, and you know, the magic of the story, where she could open that thing and read to me of the Crusades and other people, explorers of Africa, slave trade, all this was all in that book, and that's what switched my mind on to the magic of the written word.
But for sure, growing up on a farm in Rhodesia in this time, I guess 40s, 50s, there must have been a lot of adventure around. I mean, I can only imagine in my mind how, I mean, living in the jungle with,
yes, it was different. It was a different life to an urban child, for instance. I mean, dogs and horses were always there, and I always, from a very early age, I had my own horses, and there was just unlimited ground around me, forests and rivers, and there were lots of playmates. And because I was white, I was a sort of boss man, and all the little black guys were like my gang, you know. But I called the shots like I was a little Julius Caesar.
Right.
These were my legions, you know. So we had so much fun, and you know, it was extraordinary. And just by chance, one of my gang, when he grew up, he became a politician and a man of great influence and power in the country, in Zambia. And he ended up as one of the ministers of government, and he and I were still friends.
Right. So it's a little bit like in Leopard Hunts in the Darkness, right?
That's correct, yes, absolutely.
Do you still go back to Zambia or Zimbabwe?
Yes, I do. Not recently. Zimbabwe is really such a terrible place now. I mean, there's nothing there. It's just disaster, chaos. It's a terrible thing. But I have my main home is in South Africa, so I have made it a rule for myself that I employ only Zimbabweans, those who've been chased out of the country by the circumstances, survival, and they've come down to South Africa. Of course, they're not terribly welcomed by the local blacks because they will work for anything, you know. They just want work, and they're very nice people. So I employ them exclusively.
Which people are Matabela or?
Mine is Shona.
Shona, okay.
And so they, you know, I still have that contact with Zimbabwe. Right.
Interestingly enough, in Leopard Hunts in the Darkness, which I think you wrote around 1983-84, you described the tyranny of Robert Mugabe. At that time, he was considered more or less a hero in the western part of the world. But 15 years afterwards, exactly what you wrote happened. Can you tell us a little about it?
Well, sometimes if the plotting is true, and you have observed the situation, the final conclusion it becomes apparent. And it's just right. If you examine and analyze a situation, which is at the time fluid and moving on, but if you examine it and carefully, and you can sometimes see where that is going to lead to, and that's what happened with the Leopard Hunts in Darkness.
Right. Did you have friends among the farmers in Zimbabwe?
Oh yes,
yeah.
Yes. Absolutely, and those a lot of my friends and people who were at school with me and that sort of thing are amongst those that have had their farms taken away from them by Mugabe and that, and from being reasonably affluent people, you know, having not great fortunes but living well, they are at my age destitute. You know, they have got nothing left, and when they were thrown out of the country, they took with them what they could carry, and that was all.
Also, Leopard of the Darkness, I think, was going to be a major motion picture in Hollywood. Did they purchase the rights from you, or?
They did, yes. Sylvester Stallone bought the rights from me, and he still has them.
Rambo himself.
The Rambo himself. He was going to play the part.
He was going to play Craig Mello.
Yes. But it didn't happen, and you know, there were other things because the movie industry, those people involved in the movie industry, are always like, we'll put 100 million into this, you know. And, they are dreamers most of the time, and if you sell a film right to an American company, there's like a 10% chance that they will actually make it into a movie. And there's almost no chance at all that it'll be a movie of any importance or make any money and that sort of thing. It'll end up on DVD or, you know, spend 3 days on the main circuit, cinema circuit, and then disappear.
But, yeah.
So, filmmaking doesn't interest me. It did at one stage. I thought it was going to be, you know, wonderful. All my books would be made into movies. Some of them were Shout at the Devil and The Train from Katanga and Dark of the Sun. And then I realized that, you know, it's a world full of big talkers and small doers. So I became a writer and not a script writer.
Right, but you still make enough money to take care of yourself and have salt in your porridge, as we say in Norway.
Yeah, good pinch of salt.
So, what does money and fortune give you?
Freedom.
Freedom to
do what you want to do.
What is it you want to do?
Whatever comes to comes to mind. It's not always the same thing,
right?
But you know, if my wife says, "Oh God, I've heard that skiing's very good in Vail in America. Let's go." I say, "Okay, book. Let's go." And I've got the time. You know, I don't have to go 9 to 5 to a job or anything like that. I've got freedom to spend my time and enough salt from the porridge to buy air tickets and go where I want to do. If I want to go on a hunting safari, it's, you know, hunting safaris these days cost you $130,000 US to go for 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the bush. I can do those things. If I want a nice motor car, I can just go and say, "Can I have a ride in that?" And ride around the block, and I say, "Fine, man, I want it." And you know, I don't have to say that. How much is it, and how much can I get on a loan and hire purchase and this sort of thing? I just tell my bank I pay them.
Is it like anything like in your book, the Assegai, to go on safari, or is it a little bit? Is it?
That was the elaborate safari of long ago, but these days it's much more, how can I say, commercialized.
Hello. It's almost time.
Yep. Are we doing?
Yeah.
A few more minutes, and then I'm going to have to leave.
Right. I understand.
Have 1 more minute only. Sorry.
Right. Okay. So we better make it quick. What is your relationship to Norway?
I enjoy Norway very much, and I've visited on numerous occasions, but not in winter. Yeah, I'm a sun person, and I like the sun. But I've always found Norway very interesting, and I've had a lot of friends through publishing, really. All of them I admire, and I know that there are many things that I would like to do. The fishing in Norway, the salmon fishing is. Okay, so I'm talking about hunting and fishing now, but you know, your Norwegian salmon fishing is, from what I know, the finest in the world on the big rivers there, and now has been more of an effort to conserve those rivers and to make sure that the salmon are not caught in nets before they can breed and that sort of thing. So I am attracted by the great forests and the big areas there, the fjords, and I think it, for me, it still has a wildness to it when you go out of the main cities, and I think that the people who overwinter out there in the wilderness are very tough guys, and I have my admiration for them. And I know that the Norwegians are independent and tough-minded. You know, they are survivors, and you don't want to get in a fight with them.
Are you familiar with the old Viking literature?
Oh yes, of course. Yes, well, your ancestors came here and gave these people a hard time, right?
Right, and
like
so
on an average once a year.
Yeah.
When that spring came, it was time to get out the old battle axe, put on the helmet, and come down to England, and crack some heads. Right? That's what I said.
And have some fun.
You don't want to get in a fight with them. So I think that obviously the genes that you
brought along,
your great granddaddy and that brought here, have a lot of that in the English trait now has survived into the Anglo-Saxon.
Right.
And so the British people are an aggressive people, and they're ready to go out and barney with anybody that, you know, not so much nowadays, but I'm talking about Victorian times, you know, they went out and banged heads together, just they got that from you.
Probably so, yes. We like to think so. I know they only have it in hooliganism, unfortunately.
Well, you see, that is the unfortunate thing about the young people today. Life is so constricted, and that, you know, before they were put in the army, and they could get rid of all the aggression in India or Africa or the Crimea or wherever it was. But nowadays, life is boring, and
yes,
those genes that we're talking about, they need to have action, and so they make action. They go and throw beer bottles at the Red Purpose football ground.
Football hooliganism, and so you think heroism is something we lack today? Real heroes?
The opportunity for it, I think, but there's heroism all the time in Iraq and Afghanistan and those places. You know, there are heroes, and young people, you know, 17, 18, 19, putting their lives on the line and fighting for what they believe is right.
You were in a bush war yourself in Rhodesia?
Yes, I was.
How was that?
Not good.
No.
Wars are good to write about, because then you control things. But in real combat, it's very uncontrolled.
Yeah.
And you get very frightened.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Because you can either run back or you can run forward, and the best thing is to run forward.
Right. You were a weapon technician, were you? Or?
No, I wasn't. No, I wrote.
No, that was Craig Mallow.
Yeah. We get a bit mixed up between me and the people I write about.
But did you write? You worked with some Norwegians on a fish boat in Cape.
Yes,
Cape,
yeah, absolutely, on the Pilchard's fleet.
Right.
And yes, the skipper of the one boat I was on was a Norwegian. He could pick up a 44-gallon drum of oil under this arm and another one under this arm. Just walk down, put them down in the deck. And I never argued with him. His hair was your colour, but he was a bit more ginger, big ginger beard.
Right, like the reddish skin.
That's right.
Yeah, and So, but you learned the trade of you fish. Did you? Was it what kind of fishing did you do? Was it
Trawling.
Trawling, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
per seine trawling. You know,
Right.
throw the net out around the shoal and then close the net into the purse and then scoop all the fish out of the net onto the deck.
Sounds like
Hard work.
Hard work, yeah. Hard,
Very
honest
hard
work.
Yeah.
So we should round up, I guess. You want?
I think we have to.
yeah,
unfortunately,
sure.
I'm sorry that you know.
We were
hung
late.
up.
We should have been earlier, but
But
we didn't expect
Well,
it to take so long time from Braden to.
Rolling.